welcome back to the second half. Hope you had an enjoyable lunch and had some nice fresh air. So we're going to kick off the next panel now. So this is about what does it mean to be heroic at business and work more generally. Because I know there's people in the audience here who are teachers or non-for-profit. So yeah, I'll just introduce myself first. I'm Ali Powell. I will be moderating this session. So my day job would be I work for Fitness First, so we're a global health and fitness company, and I'm their Chief Commercial Officer. So let's go now and meet our excellent panel. CASPAR, I know you've spoken, but yeah.
Shall I introduce myself?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm CASPAR. I've built up a number of different businesses, and as some of you may have heard earlier, I've sailed around the world with my kids recently come back from that. So I had to build up some businesses to make that happen.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Wendy Addison. I'm known as the whistleblower for the biggest corporate disaster in South African history. Also known, thank you. Thank you very much. It's also known as South Africa's Enron. And post blowing the whistle and securing justice, I founded a company called Speak Out, Speak Up. So we could train for courageous conversations so that people don't have to head for the whistleblowing door. My intention is to empower people to speak up via courageous conversations before heading for the exit. Thanks.
Luke Benjamin, I'm the COO for the real estate business for Deutsche Asset Management, one of the sponsors here, covering all of Europe, plus look after a business called Sustainable Investments, which is around social and environmental impact investing. Based here in London, obviously from the accent, originally from Australia.
I'm Dan Edwards, and I jump off shit, basically. So I don't really know why I'm here. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Parkour Generations, and we build better people through movement training, pretty much. And I'm not going next, so. Back to Casper.
Okay, great. I think I've got one. Thank you. I'm hooked up. So yes, I'm mic'd up. Whatever the word. We'll have that floating between you guys. Whoever wants to answer first. So okay. So we have a few questions to kick off this topic around heroism in business and work. So I think the first question we'd like to pose to you is, in your opinion, what does it mean? You know, what does it look like to be heroic in an organization? Thinking about either the role of the leader at the top or employees within the business.
I'd really like to know Caspar's thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. Back to me. Those of you who saw my talk earlier, for me, one of the key things is about having leaders who focus on what is right rather than what is wrong. And you know, my first experience in the workplace was in the early 90s, and management was very much the thing there. And here's the targets, here's the accountability, and you know, being beaten with a stick if you don't get that, the whole carrot and stick thing. And you know, having sort of learned and been on my journey to having really lead now through my sailing experiences and my business experiences, I think that management is very much the failure of leadership. So if you provide people a clear vision, a clear direction, then and the values and the way they operate, for me, that's what heroism in business is about, as opposed to management. So that's kind of my start of the 10, I guess.
Thanks very much, Caspar. For me, what I've observed and experienced is, I wouldn't even call it heroism, because I believe that we all have the ability not only to speak up, but I think what's missing in that narrative is that we also need to learn to listen up. And I've been in many, many organizations where they have all these very sophisticated tools and mechanisms that cost a lot of money, but without courage, they're all pretty ineffective. And there's also this bias to believe or think that leaders are leaders because they don't need any training. They don't need investment in their training because they've already met the criteria of being a leader. But one of the things that's crucial to listening up is understanding our natural defenses to shut down when we hear bad news or difficult news that might impact our own self-image. So for me, heroism, but I also want to turn the volume down on that narrative, because I do believe we can all do this, is about soliciting information, listening, and speaking up.
Yeah, I'll just add that we tend to using in the corporate world, coming from the banking, this term culture. And for me, culture is something that continually evolves. And in order to create that culture, for me, and certainly within my team that I work with, there are kind of three things that I get my group to focus on. One is the mindset that the individuals have. The second is communication. And one of my biggest bugbears working in a corporate is email. Effective communication. An email is not a form of communication, full stop. It's a statement. It can be interpreted many, many different ways. I'll come back to communication with a little story in a moment, but the third part is conviction. And that is empowering your people, your staff. And the hardest thing in business is to say no, and to have the conviction to say no. And be free to express your opinions around why we say no. It's so easy to say yes and just go on and then blame somebody else. But the little story about email and communication, I was based in Singapore, and combination of culture and everything else. And I came into the office very, very early. And you know those blue cables that stick into your computer? I pulled them all out of my entire team. And sat there, worked away on my computer, and they all sat there and did nothing. And I watched them for about 45 minutes, and I walked up to them and I said, "Is everything all right?" And the next minute I'm getting phone calls from IT going, "Is something wrong with your team?" They're all calling me saying something's wrong with their computer. And I said to them, "Is there something that you could be doing? Is there somebody you could be talking to? There's a phone on your desk. Can you pick it up? Can you have a conversation with somebody?" Rather than emailing, because they just have this culture of I can send something and I abdicate my responsibility for it. So for me, to get a culture or to create a culture comes from a mindset, comes from effective communication, and comes from empowering and having the conviction as the leaders, as the managers, but also as the team members.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with what everyone said. I think in terms of heroism to do with leadership, I think it's important to remember, if you are leading an organization, that it's important to remember that you are the servant, effectively. And just kind of see yourself that way, to remember that you're sort of the one that underpins it, and actually you're trying to serve the organization and everyone else in it. And that's kind of a better way to be as a leader, and to sort of keep your own, in a way, to keep your own ego and arrogance and things like that in check, in case that does grow. So I try to see myself as a servant, which I think kind of ties back to Ari's definition of the hero being someone that does something for a greater good, and sacrifices for a greater good. So I think that's probably the link to heroism from leadership, either a hero or a sandwich, of course, one of the two.
I want to pick up on Luke's point about the culture there. And I'm always fascinated by learning from people who do things at extremes, because it magnifies everything so much more, and there's a lot of learning there. And I was reading a few weeks ago about this hedge fund, Bridgewater, run by this guy called Ray Dalio, I suspect a number of you may know. And their ethos that they talk about is radical honesty. And this is really, really out there at the extremes. And what I understand that to mean is that literally you say everything that you're thinking. And that's quite scary. And he says when people first join the firm, they have a cognitive understanding of what that means, but it takes them 18 months before emotionally they really understand what that radical honesty means. And I think heroism in business, I think there are some clues there about that honesty and transparency. And we're seeing it with a lot of charities. So we were talking earlier about charities reinventing themselves, and transparency and honesty, I think, are really, really key things in that. So.
I'd also like to add to the comment on culture. In my own experience and in others, I think there's a difference between the culture of an organization and the climate of an organization. And culture is really what we ought to be doing. So it's the mission statement that might be hanging on the wall, or if you go to Barclays head office in Canary Wharf, you'll see these massive statements of their values. But often people's behavior, the demonstrable behavior, is often not aligned with the culture. And that's why I prefer to talk about climate, because climate is quite different. It's what we can do as opposed to what we should be doing. It's what we can do and how we empower our staff to be acting in the alignment of the values. And climate really is like the weather. It is changeable, and it's more about listening to the voices in the corridor. The corridor speak, because that's actually what's happening on the ground. It's often not what tone at the top is. There's sometimes quite a big differential between the two. So climate is really what's happening. It can change quite quickly as well, in both a good and a negative way. Okay, great. Well, thanks for that. So I think this links to the second discussion area, which is what, in your opinion, is the benefits of being a heroic organization? Who would like to start? Well, since I've got the mic. Yes. I think the benefits really are being at the forefront of innovation. We talk about employees being able to have pro-organizational voice, so being able to come to the leadership and say, hey, I've got an idea here, what do you think about this? And acknowledging that, for leaders to acknowledge that they don't hold all the information all the time. It's important to say, I may have one piece of the puzzle, or I may not be the expert in this area. There might be someone in my team that knows something better than I do, or has a different piece of the puzzle. So I think that allows, that ability, and again, it's underscored by courage, but that ability to have these courageous conversations allows individuals and corporations to stretch themselves and to be the innovative future companies. Mm-hmm.
I think it's also about in this day and age, probably about retention, because the climate now is that people don't stay in their companies for very long. They can move. There's a lot of movement, a lot of shift, and there's a lot of choice. So people are now choosing to work at a place that they feel aligned to the values of that place, rather than just a place that's going to make them more money. So and that is growing. That consciousness is absolutely growing. So if you want to be able to keep the best people, you kind of have to present to them values that they can align with, and so I think, and that's going to be more and more important. Those old models are definitely changing, as CASPAR alluded to, and which is a good thing. So I think one of the benefits of having really strong, positive, heroic values in an organization is that you will keep strong, positive, heroic people in your organization, and that keeping them together. There's a quotation I really love, which is that a great leader is just someone who can bring great people together and keep them together. And I think that's really, really true, and I've seen that in my own organization. Just keeping really, really good people makes the difference, because they will produce great stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree. Ultimately, if I was to bring all of this together, I'd summarize it by an environment where you're having fun. Let's be serious. With work, we spend more time with our work colleagues than we do with our loved ones. Split it into three. If you're lucky, you sleep 8 hours a day. If you're lucky, you work 8 hours a day. Most of us work more than that, which leaves a very, very small portion of your time for your loved ones. So not only retaining the good people, not only having that environment where people can speak freely, can voice, can share, you also become an employer of choice, or an employer that people want to work for. And at the end of the day, we're all on the planet for a very finite period of time. And me certainly, I'd like to ensure that when I spend a lot of my time, I'm having fun. It's not that we're at a theme park every day. There are always challenges, but underpinning all of that is you need to have an environment where it's meaningful, you have enjoyment, you leave at the end of the day feeling as though you've achieved something or you've contributed to something, and that's being in an organisation where you have those leaders, you have that heroic ambition, if you will, but underpinning all of that for me is creating an environment of fun.
Got lots to say on this. The first thing that strikes me about having a hero organisation is about adaptability. Now, I think we live in an absolutely unprecedented time at the moment in terms of just the amount of change and the amount of uncertainty there is in the world. Politically, there's huge amounts of uncertainty. Economically, I mean, the whole thing about artificial intelligence, machine learning, cryptocurrencies coming through, I mean, it's just massive amounts of change. And then you look at culture and behaviors and how much the iPhone has changed. And I've seen it with my kids now coming back. For 2 years we didn't have devices, and suddenly now they're like addicted to their devices. And it's completely changing how we're doing things. So the benefit for me of a hero organisation is there's all this uncertainty and all this change, that if you focus on culture, the values, for me that's the one constant that can actually take you through what's going to be changing in the future. So for me, I think that this type of conversation is heart and centre of where companies need to be thinking of. So.
Okay, so we're curious then to know what is getting in the way? What is stopping this? What is the obstacles to companies and work becoming more heroic? And do you have any practical solutions you'd like to share?
I've got the microphone. Okay, so I think, look, the conversation I've heard already is all about values and culture. And what I think there is an issue with that is people have a legacy of doing values and culture in business. They do it once a year, forget about it, come back and it's rolled eyes, oh God, we're doing this again. So there is a whole bunch of preconceptions that exist already. And so the conversation needs to be refreshed and rechanged. So whenever I sort of sit down with people and talk about this, it's like, okay, so what do you understand by this? And let's get all those preconceptions out. And then you can start to move forward, because you can't influence anyone unless you know what's already influencing them. And if people sitting there with this stuff at the back of their mind saying, I've done this before and it doesn't work, so I'm switched off, then that's all you're going to get. So the solution is putting it out there on the table and having the 100% candid conversation about what these things are, and finding a way through it. So.
Thank you. One of the things I find very interesting about training is that a lot of it is repeatable. So you get a fancy handout at the end of the training session, which inevitably ends up in the bottom drawer somewhere. And what I really relish now is organizations seeing the value and power in storytelling, because from a neuroscience point of view, we understand that storytelling impacts different parts of our brain. So it allows individuals that are hearing the story to engage with it on an emotional level rather than a rational intellectual level. So if you're getting the theoretical handout, or it's a repeat training with the leader saying, guys, this is what I want you to do, it really isn't going to change any behavior. It needs to actually be invoked within the neural centers of the brain that provokes emotional engagement. And one of the things that I've been working on is a virtual reality immersion for a courageous conversation. Has anybody had a virtual reality immersion in the audience? No one? Anyone play games? Okay. So you'll understand that it's once you're in an immersion, it's a very powerful mechanism to change behavior, and it does change behavior. It's because it provokes this, or it ignites that part of our brain. So that's what I'd like to see organizations moving towards, rather than this repetitive handouts, repeating the same mantra. It really needs to change in order for other people to change with it.
Yeah, I think the fear of failure, and again, I'm coming from a very large corporate organisation. just the individuals within the team, the fear of failure, the fear of making a mistake. And the funny thing is, we don't grow unless we make a mistake. You will never grow by continually succeeding. You have to make a mistake, but the individuals need to feel, and the team members, the organisation need to feel safe that they can make a mistake. Don't make it twice and be open about the mistake, but make that mistake. Don't fear making that mistake. And I'll come back to one other thing, this is very, very passionate point for me, is effective communication, open, honest communication. I attended a management offsite recently in Berlin, and before the offsite, one of my colleagues sent me, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, sends out a shareholder letter every year. And this year's letter to shareholders, he attached the original letter some 17 years ago. And there was one comment that I took out of that, which we reinforced during that offsite. And it was one of those offsites where everything was on the table. There was nothing that wasn't not said effectively. And that comment was, disagree but commit. So at the end, we could have a discussion where we may actually disagree, but at the end of the day, we were all committed to that objective and that goal. And having the disagreement means that you're having a safe environment where you can have productive and open discussions, communication. It's safe. There is no fear of failure. There is no fear of emotionally annoying somebody. Nobody takes it personal. So yeah, fear of failure, I think, is stopping us, and I think communication, or poor, ineffective communication, is a barrier.
How do you change that? Sorry.
How do you change this? You change it by creating an environment, and I use an example with my staff. I got a few people together, and it's the way you present. It's the way you present your thoughts or your comments. And a classic one that I learned, if we're discussing a new concept or something, it's more around presenting, this is my view, this is my opinion based on my set of facts that I have. Somebody else may have a different view, but that comes with a different set of facts. So in effect, what actually happens and where the frustration comes in is that we're both coming from a different fact set or a different information set. And you have to create alignment. And that alignment is by communicating and educating that other party around what your fact set or your base set is. And only then can you have a productive conversation and move forward. And a large part of that is stopping this and opening this.
Can I jump in on that? It's really interesting. When I had to turn my business around, one of the big things that I learned, I think takeaway, is that I had to take my ego out of it, which is the proxy for the mouth. And we developed this saying in the business, which is, it doesn't matter who is right, it only matters what is right. And we just turned that into a phrase. And again, it's the repetitiveness of this stuff. You keep talking about it. And that was a really key thing for us. I mean, okay, you're not going to remove it entirely, but it's moving in that direction. So it's...
Sorry. One of the things I also want to talk about is power. And I think people that are in power, leaders, often forget what a blunt instrument it is, and sometimes what it can do. And so when a leader says, hey, if you've got anything to tell me, my door is always open, is actually not good enough, really, because it already says you are coming to my office to tell me information. I've got an office, you don't have an office, by the way. And secondly, when you come into the office is filled with trophies, certificates, family pictures. It's the ambience of that environment that talks to power. And so one of the ways to mitigate that is to build psychological safety, to be aware of these things, but also to model the behavior that you want to see. You know, take down the certificates and the trophies and maybe even the walls of your office. Speak up. If you want other people to speak up yourself. Speak up the chain of command. Demonstrate that behavior, because other people will follow. And also, I think that the biggest thing about psychological safety and providing that is individuals' observations of what does happen when people do speak up. That is far more powerful than words of encouragement. So it's people's perception, and we're going back to climate again, it's the people's perception, employees' perception of organizational justice, rather than the organization say, guys, my door is always open, come into my office, I want to hear your voice. There are a whole lot of mechanisms to just dilute that sense of power, because I think power can be a really good thing, but it can also be a very damaging thing at the same time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think as like simple things like instead of saying my door is open, come and see me, you just go and see them, you know, as a leader. So going to where they are, and you kind of move into their world, and that makes them feel more comfortable. So I think a lot of this comes down to emotional intelligence, probably. Most organizations and all organizations really are just groups of humans, right? Communities of humans. So how well they communicate is the key thing. And a lot of that comes down to emotional intelligence. So when we coach people and when we educate other coaches, certifying people to go out and coach people, and then certifying the people who go and certify the people who certify the people. That whole process is, the further up you go in that process, the more we just focus on emotional intelligence. Even though what we teach is parkour is movement. The higher level coaches, we just teach them about emotional intelligence and how important that is to get right. If you get that right, all your communication will work, you'll be able to deliver your stuff. And that's for a lot of people, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. Just to begin understanding that it is a thing. You know, it's often seen as 4 stages of emotional intelligence. The first one is just perceiving emotions, so understanding that different people have different emotions, and that you have emotions. So it's perception, understanding, learning to utilize your own and focus your own emotions, and then the last stage is kind of learning to manage emotions in conjunction with other people. So learning to manage 2 sets of emotions, either yours and theirs, or 2 other people's if they're having a rift. And that emotional intelligence for me is the underpinning of all things in organizations. And the better we get at that, the better our organizations will be. And so hopefully more of that will become sort of standard in a way, standard education.
Yeah, within work, we summarize it as awareness. And as leaders and heroes in the business, we first of all have to have a high level of self-awareness. And that's, you know, being able to sit there on a constant basis and pretend that there's a mirror in front. And what is the rest of the organization seeing of you in your actions, in your behaviors, in your words? Are you saying this in your actions different? And then the other element, which is even harder, is the situational awareness. We tend to get buried in a specific task or a specific function or a specific problem. Being able to elevate yourself out and look down and have that situational awareness and understand there's something going on over here that I need to go and address because that's affecting other parts of the business or this individual or this group of people, etc. And to have the situational awareness, you first of all have to have a high level of self-awareness. And for me, they're the 2 core skills that effective and high-performing teams and organizations need to focus on.
Yeah, I agree with you that it starts with you. It starts with us. And self-awareness is really key to that. But what I've also learned is it's one step of progress, because self-awareness is not enough often to act on your own self-image. So what we have going on from a psychological point of view, we often have an element of, this is how I see myself. I think I'm a good, moral, honest person. And when we do surveys, for instance, around speaking up and whistleblowing, 90% of people will say, absolutely, I'm a good person. I have self-awareness. And if I see something wrong, then I'm going to say something. But then you look at the reality, and under 40% of people actually do. So there's two senses of selves. The one that says, this is who I am and who I want to be, and absolutely I will speak up. And the other person is saying, well, actually, I don't want to get people into trouble. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to look like a fool. So we have this internal fight going on in terms of what we would like to see ourselves as and what we actually are. And I think the way to address that is to really empower people. So it's back to saying, okay, we've got this self-awareness, but we need to be acting on that self-awareness. We need to be taking steps and behaving in accordance and alignment with that self-awareness.
So I want to pick up on a point you mentioned earlier, which is about listening. And I know when I was changing all the things in my world, someone said to me that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So the essence about building a team. And someone shared with me that people only hear what they understand. And truly listening to people and understanding what people are saying is such a fundamental thing. And there's a really simple experiment that someone carried out with kids. So they had a card. On one side it was red, on one side it was green. And they showed both sides to the child, and they said, what side can you see? And so the adult sitting on the opposite side from them, and the child would look at it and say, well, I can see red. And then they'd ask the child and say, well, what color can I see? And they would say, red. And then, because you think that everybody else sees the world the same way that you do. And it's used in a child example, but actually, I think what I realize is a lot of people that still think that, or you still fall into the trap that other people think and see things the way you do. So that whole process of truly listening and understanding what it is for other people, for me, that was one of the things that helped unlock a lot of stuff, both in my children and in my business. Just understanding what it is that drives other people, why are they doing what they're doing, and that's the listening process.
And asking questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's one other, all of you, I suppose, if you're in a corporate environment, have had performance reviews, or you're sitting down with your managers and they're giving you feedback. And it's annual, or it could be quarterly, or it could be wherever. One of the things that I introduced many, many years ago, which I've found very, very effective, is we sit down and we set our targets and we review the targets and we go through and it's fine. And at the end of the conversation, and I'm surprised every time I've changed a role or I've taken on a new team member, I'm surprised with the reaction to this question that I get from them. So we have a half an hour, 45 minute, and we go through and I provide them with feedback, because that's the way the organisation's structured. You need to provide the feedback, and it's a waterfall, it goes downhill. And at the end of the conversation, I always say, okay, now we're changing roles. Now we're changing positions. I want you to provide feedback to me. And I ask that of every single team member, because it's not a one-way street. It has to be two ways. And in that environment, if that's reinforced on a regular basis, those conversations and that feedback becomes real. It's not what they think I want to hear. It ends up becoming a real conversation, and it's something that I take on personally, and then I become accountable to them. It's not just them being accountable to me as a manager or a leader. So it has to be a two-way street. It's like a relationship, it's like a marriage. You need to be able to converse and have that dialogue. But being conscious of asking, and asking in a regular basis in a safe environment, is very, very powerful.
Okay, so yeah, I absolutely agree, and on that point about the awareness and the feedback, I think that's excellent that you do that. I always try to encourage it myself. We have a model called the Johari Window, if some of you know about it, which is this is what you think of yourself, and this is basically where the blind spots are, and it's that safe environment of saying, well, this is just the facts, and how now we've got that awareness, can you try to improve yourself? So yeah, we would feel that 85% of your success in your job or as a leader is based on EQ, and 15% is IQ, which is sort of just interesting to think about the academic point in there. Okay, so I think the final area we wanted to touch on is examples that you have of where you've seen other organizations. I know we've touched on things you're all doing here, but other organizations showing this, manifesting in a very positive way, or, you know, on the flip side where you've seen it, like there's been a few examples in the press recently in the airline industry, where it not really working at all.
I've got a mic. I think there are loads of examples now, actually. I think we're living in a very interesting age that, whereby the rhetoric itself is changing, and we see so many companies now, big companies, huge companies, talking about things like compassion. And we'll hear about more about that tomorrow from Safia, and compassion in corporate structures. And, you know, the idea that compassion would be discussed as an important thing in business, 20 years ago, that you would never hear that word in business. Or probably 10 years ago, you'd never hear it. So the fact that it's now a topic, and that the companies that are highest ranked on compassion surveys as a company in the world are some of the biggest companies. Facebook, and they tend to win the compassionate surveys, as in they're the most compassionate to their employees, and they also make, you know, the most money. So that's very interesting that compassion, actually, these companies are making lots of money, but they're also really focusing on compassion. I think that excellent book by Frederick Laloux, the whole Reinventing Organizations, and the idea of teal organization structures, and a teal organization being a company that, or an organization that has purpose as its driving factor, rather than bottom line, rather than productivity or anything like that. It just has purpose and values, and they put everything secondary to that. And there are lots of organizations out there now in the world, hundreds, that are doing that, and still being very, very, very profitable. But they're not, the profit is a secondary thing. So I think there are loads of examples, and we're kind of on this cusp, you know, but it's very uncertain, because we're on that cusp of change. So, but that change is definitely here, and I think there's so many good examples of that. Patagonia, you know, so many companies that really put the purpose above the bottom line, and I think that's probably going to grow. It's just at the friction point at the moment where we're going through the change. But yeah, for me, I think they're all over the place, and it's a positive thing.
Right.
Well, as the whistleblower, I'm not going to talk about the bad companies, but I'm just going to say Barclays Bank. Anyone here from Barclays? I don't know if anyone was aware or noticed the CEO trying to unmask the whistleblower in Barclays Bank. Not a good practice, and also, again, out of alignment with their codes of conduct. If you look on their website, if you look, it's easily accessible, and then you've got a really senior executive acting against those values and against this code of conduct. So there's many examples of bad companies, but I want to talk about the good companies. There's one company in Michigan, actually, called, I may get this wrong, I stand open to correction, I think it's called Cascade Engineering. And it's been profitable for 4 years. But the owner and the founder of this business, Fred Keller, employed the people around in Michigan that were felons, had come out of prison. He employed people that were welfare recipients. So instead of labeling and categorizing these people as losers and scroungers, he actually employed them. He brought them into his company, he upskilled them, and he's got this fabulous company that's run very profitably. And also he's done a lot of work in terms of race relations, which have been fraught specifically in Michigan itself. So he's done a really lot of good work. And I think there's a word that I like to look for and see actually demonstrated, and that's sustainability. How long can this go on for? You know, I don't think profit and loss is going to be the currency of success, or profit rather is going to be the currency of success for the long-term future. I think it's going to be there's going to be a different currency that measures the success of the company. So yeah, there's lots. Unilever's another really good company. Morningstar's a really good company. And I think also one of the things that these companies do is it's not a business-to-business approach, it's a human-to-human approach. And I think that's core to what their success is.
Yeah, I've got two things that spring to mind. First thing is in the charitable sector. So I was very privileged a couple of months ago to be invited along to a day-long session with some of the largest charities in the UK, and looking at how do they innovate and how do they become the charities of the future. And a lot of the large charities, they have declining revenue lines and they have issues. And the primary thing around this is transparency and the trust that's around that. So we were talking about this at lunch with Jocelyn, and we were talking about this charity, I think it's Think Water, is it? Charity Water. And they have their overheads are funded by a certain number of people, and they're extremely transparent about that. So then anything that comes in, so £5 comes in, that goes directly into the aid places where they're going. And then there's a lot of stuff is filmed and is constantly available. So I think that transparency is super, super powerful in the charitable sector. In the commercial sector, on that same day, I was privileged to spend some time with an insurance company in the fintech space. And they've grown in the space of about 6 years. They've just been sold for just under £500 million. But the core thing they were doing was they had values right at the heart and center of what they were doing. Data was also heart and center, and anybody could make decisions about data and come up with different ideas. But it was just their approach that I thought that was very, very refreshing, and clearly it's worked commercially for them as well. So you can link these two things together.
Go back to the point on sustainability. Again, I'll revert back to banking. I'm not from RBS or Barclays. We'll be at Barclays. But we have, Deutsche Bank has had its challenges. We've mentioned a lot of great companies. I think one of the fundamental, along with the sustainability, is taking a longer term view. One of the failings, in my opinion, of a lot of the large corporates, banks included, is the decision making is made with a very, very short term focus. And that actually has a compounding impact effect to the organisation and to the organisation's ability to be agile, move, change, evolve, develop. And I think that is an overall cultural shift. I think we need to work with the regulators around changing that. It comes into factors around compensation, etc. Making decisions, the right decisions for the shareholders, sustainable decisions, investing for that longer term, not just looking at what am I going to deliver in the next quarter or the next 6 months. And part of that in an organisation, and I've seen this in a number, is they have funded centres of incubation or think tanks and areas which are completely segregated, do not have a P&L impact, but are challenged to think outside the square, come up with what are the new parts, where's the industry going to be in 10 or 15 years' time. That's where a lot of the fintechs have come from, a lot of where the startups have come from, is from that incubation. And setting aside some of the profits of what we generate today to invest into the future, I think is going to be a critical success factor to companies in the future.
And of course, the most heroic organisation of them all is the Hero Roundtable. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I think that's a wrap. So thank you all for a very fascinating and inspiring discussion. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
The Hero Roundtables are the global events that ask the question, what is a hero? You've just seen one hero talk. To find more and join the conversation, visit our website or social media.